Before this year, I really feel like the colors that ended up in my palettes were based on a series of random events, like using colors that I already owned, using colors that were handed down to me, looking at blog posts that would suggest what really good colors would be to put in your palette, and looking at artists that I admire and seeing the colors they used and picking and choosing from those colors, and then just putting them all together in my palette. So my palettes have evolved over time, and I think that's okay to grow with your palettes, to have this evolution of colors. Now, however, this is the first year that I gained more knowledge about color theory and how colors actually mix, and I feel like it gave me intention behind deciding what colors to put in my palette for the first time. So if you're curious about what colors I've put in my palette and why I ended up with those colors, I'll be sharing all of that in this video. Now, before I dive into sharing with you exactly what colors I'm using and how I arrived at them, I want to say that I don't think there's a so-called perfect palette to start with, or a perfect palette in general. I don't think that there is a best place to start. I think that there is a place to start for each of us that's unique, and that's based on different factors. Like, first being, how much money do we have to spend on paints? Using professional grade can be expensive versus using student grade. And we also work within what we aesthetically like. So we all have our own taste, and maybe you like painting with a more muted palette, maybe you like super bright colors, and that's going to determine your color choices as well. So I just want to say that I'm not here to share with you exactly what colors you should start with or that are the best colors to use. I'm just sharing with you what I have in my palette and what I am currently using and enjoying. And if you want to see a couple of my previous palettes to see what I had in them before, I will link those videos here for you as well. So now I'm going to share with you the colors that I have in my palette. And instead of just giving you a long shopping list of all the colors that I have in my palette, I thought that it would be more helpful for me to share them in groups. So I have my primary colors, my secondary colors, and then how I expanded those core colors. I think that this is hopefully a helpful way for you, especially if you are at a point where you're building your palette, to think about your colors in groupings. So what are those core important colors that you would want to have in your palette no matter what? And then how would you expand from there? So let's get into it, and I'm going to start with my primary colors. My primary colors are primary yellow. This one is Holbein's Imidazolone yellow. I have a magenta, and that is quinacridone magenta, also by Holbein. And then I have a phthalocyanine blue by M. Graham. Now, you don't have to use these specific colors, but I'm going to explain to you why I've chosen these as my core primary colors. And that's going to need to take us to the traditional color wheel. Now, this is the traditional color wheel, and you might be wondering, why am I not following the traditional color wheel and using a blue, red, and yellow as my primary colors? And the reason is because this color wheel, based on what I've learned, is outdated. This color wheel is really based in theory, and it was a theory at a time where pigments weren't readily available, so there weren't as many pigments as we have available now. What we also have is science, so we can actually map colors, we understand how we perceive colors and see colors, and there's something I learned that's called modern color theory rather than traditional color theory. So the first time I think I actually saw modern color theory was probably with this color wheel, and I had no idea what I was looking at. So you might have seen this as well. It's from handprint.com by Bruce McAvoy, and he calls this the artist color wheel. And what all of these diamonds are that are speckled along this color wheel are pigments. So they're actual pigments that are mapped based on their color into this color space or on this color wheel. Now, this is important because this color wheel is not laid out like this color wheel. And the only reason I understand that now is due to this, which is called the color disc, and it was created by Peter Donahue, who goes by the Color Nerd. And this really helped me understand this. And I want to take a moment just to explain to you what we're looking at here and why this is something that I'm not referring to anymore and why this is so helpful. I want to show you the side-by-side comparison of when a color wheel is based on the traditional color theory of red, yellow, and blue versus science-based, vision-based, red, green, blue, and cyan, magenta, yellow. So the traditional color wheel is really based on red, yellow, and blue. And this is how it places the colors around the wheel. Red is across from green,
as a complement, and then you have blue and orange across from each other, and then purple and yellow across from each other. On the science-based, vision-based color wheel, we have red and cyan as complements, and green and magenta as complements, and blue and yellow as complements. And this is significant because this is actually how we see colors. We see colors based on the cones in our eyes, and it's red, green, and blue. That's the colors we actually see. The actual visual complements are magenta, yellow, and cyan. And the way that we know this, or the way that we can check ourselves, is that if you stare at a yellow piece of paper and then you look away and blink, you're going to see blue. And if you stare at red and then blink, you're going to see cyan, which I find very, very interesting. And that is what they call a visual complement. So a visual complement means that's how we see. I also want to show you how this color wheel is skewed. So the traditional color wheel places green here, and then I want you to look at the angle or the amount of space around the rotation to get to red. So this is how the traditional color wheel spaces out the colors. So look at the distance between green and red. And then if you look at the distance between green to get to red, it's actually much longer. So there are a lot more colors in between green and red visually on the spectrum than there are in this traditional wheel. So science tells us that we see many more colors in between green and red than are shown on this traditional color wheel.
So the reason why this is helpful is because these both actually are based in science, which means that it's based in how we perceive light, actual colors that are mapped, actual pigments that are mapped. And you can see on this color wheel, there's no pigments mapped. And what we are doing when we're painting is we're actually working with real things and not theory. We're working with real pigments, and they behave and act, and we see them a very specific way. And the reason why this is important is because if we can see where these pigments fall and we can understand what they do when they start to interact with each other, then we have more knowledge about how to go about and pick them and decide what we want to put in our palette. And for me, my goal is to pick colors that offer me the most ability to create other colors, because what we're doing is we're mixing colors, right? So if I pick two colors and they can create a nice range of colors, or in other words, a gamut of colors, then that's going to be how I'm going to select my colors. I want to pick colors that come together and make even more colors, because that's what makes it fun. And so that is the intention behind a lot of the colors and why I've picked them. So I'm going to link both of their websites below, and there are countless other people who have much more knowledge about this than I do on the internet, so you can definitely look them up as well. So back to this one, we're going to use this sort of as a background so I can lay my paints on top of it and you can see where they land. So here's my magenta, which actually, is kind of a pink. So it's here. And then I have a primary yellow, which is right in the middle. It's right there. It's this one, right in the middle of the yellow space. And then I have a phthalo blue, which is actually right here somewhere. If I had picked a red, that would be over here. And I feel like that kind of skews the range. It's fine, and you can do it that way. There's no right or wrong. But just from what I've read, and again, going back to the possibilities of colors you can create from these three, it's going to be more possibilities when you mix than if I picked a red that was over here. So that's why I have picked magenta, phthalocyanine blue, and this yellow, simply because they create a nice range of mixes, and it's less muted and it's more bright. Here is the actual example of that. So this is my yellow, my magenta, and my phthalocyanine blue, and these are the mixes that it creates. So it creates this secondary orange, this secondary blue, violet, purple color, and then this secondary green. And you can also get a really nice neutral, although not super easy to do that. I think mixing any true dark gray is a little bit of a balancing trick, but you can do it, and these are the range of colors I get. Now, from what I learned, there's something called a saturation cost. When I mix yellow and magenta, it creates this orange, but it's not as bright as this yellow. It's not as bright as this magenta. And this is described in total layman's terms, and I hope I'm not butchering it, but these two colors have lost chroma, and chroma is just the amount of saturation or the brightness of this color. It is just much more dull than either of these colors. And the same thing happens when I mix this blue and this yellow. So these two colors are quite saturated, bright, chromatic. So they have a lot of chroma. And when you mix them together, they do get a nice green, but it's, you know, not quite as bright as you would expect you would get. So that brings me to the secondaries. So the next three colors are secondary colors, and I've added them in at the suggestion actually of Bruce McAvoy's website, handprint.com. And the secondaries I've added are basically the colors that happen when you mix these two together. So I've added a orange. For me, that's pyrrole orange right here. And I've also added a green, which is, for me, this is it's called Viridian, but the pigment is actually phthalo green. So if you're familiar with it, phthalo green is the color I've added here. And then I've added a blue violet. So not a purple, because there's not, you know, and I've never had purple in my palette. I feel like it's pretty easy to mix up between a blue and a magenta. So I don't have a purple, but I added a blue violet, so an indigo type color. And that is a French ultramarine, which is actually on the border of indigo and blue. It's kind of over here. So it's leaning more towards a blue than it is a purple, like a true blue than a purple. So they're kind of right next to each other. But by adding these colors in, what I'm trying to do is reduce the saturation cost so that the resulting mixes I get are brighter. So this is that primaries palette. So it's all these colors are mixed from those three primary colors, yellow, magenta, and blue. And this is the color wheel that I get when I add in the secondary. So this is when I've added the orange, the French ultramarine, and then the Viridian, or it's actually a phthalo green. And this is what happens when I add them. And you can see just in this corner alone, or this half alone, that I'm gonna get brighter mixes. So this yellow and this magenta had created this orange. And what I did was I added in a secondary color, the orange, that previously was getting mixed. And now this orange and this yellow create a brighter resulting orange than this one and this one made. Okay, so what I'm doing, again, to repeat myself, is basically adding in the secondary so that I can maintain the chroma or the brightness of the mixes that I get. And this goes back to what I said before about when I add in colors, my intention was to maintain a bigger amount of mixing possibilities that I would get. So if I add in a color, I want it to create more mixing possibilities rather than less, because less by meaning it closes in on here. So as you can see, it's brighter on the outside and then it gets more desaturated, so more muted as we move to the center of this color disc. And so if I add more of the chromatic colors, so more of the brighter colors to the outside, and I'm mixing those, then I can maintain a wider range of possibilities. So more possibilities rather than less possibilities. So I feel like for me, that was a nice approach towards picking colors. It's more intentional to me. So again, as a visual example, here is that phthalo green that I added as a secondary, and these two create a brighter green than this one, although this is still a really nice green, but it's just they create a nicer, brighter green. It doesn't mean I can't make this. That means I can still make this, but it's just that I have the possibility of also making this. Now let's look down here. Here is the color I replaced. So French ultramarine replaced this, and now the resulting blue is a brighter blue than this. And I also am getting a brighter purple, if you can see that on camera. So it's just a brighter, more chromatic color result that I get. And it doesn't mean, again, that I can't mix these up with these colors, because I still have these colors, right? I could just mix these two just to get the more muted version. But if I wanted a brighter color, then I also have the possibility of doing that, just simply by adding in these secondary colors. So now after I have these 6, I have a lot of mixing possibilities, and I can also mix a neutral in both versions. But the issue is that mixing up a neutral is a little bit difficult and kind of finicky. So I always have liked to keep a dark neutral in my palette. I used to use Payne's gray, I've used Jane's gray, and my neutral of choice right now is neutral tint. And I really like this version of a dark neutral. It's sort of a warmish gray color, I would describe. It's just a really nice neutral gray. Gray falls right in the center. And again, you can take these colors and you can mix a neutral gray, but having one is just really helpful and convenient. So here's my dark neutral. And then the other colors that I'm missing really from these color wheels that are really bright are more earth tones. You might already know, but burnt sienna is a wonderful neutral earthy color to have. It's a reddish orange earth tone, and so that's going to fall somewhere over here in this brown area, and it's a great mixer, especially mixed with a ultramarine to make a neutral color. So it's just an all around, I feel like, a nice core color that I've always had. Mixes well. I like it. The other color that I've more recently loved, so last year and also this year, is a raw sienna color. So this is actually a Monte Amiata natural sienna, and this is just a sienna color, and I feel like this is a great earthy yellow, so it's going to fall in here somewhere. So it's an earthy yellow color, and I really feel like it adds that ability to add landscape type colors to my palette and to mix with other colors to kind of tone them down. So I really like this as another earth color to add to the palette. So at this point we have 9 colors, and 12 colors is actually a very common number of colors to have in a basic palette. So the next 3 colors are the additional colors that are here to support this already quite dynamic palette. There's only really one green here, and while we can mix a lot of greens, what I've decided to do is add another green, and this one is chromium oxide green. It's showing right here on the color disc, and the reason why I picked chromium oxide green instead of something like sap green, which I've had for a long time, is simply because I want to experiment. I've heard a lot of good things about this color and the ability that it has when it mixes with other colors, and that's why I've put this in my palette, for none other than I want to try it out. The next color I have is a deep yellow, so in other words, like a yellowish orange. This one happens to be permanent yellow deep. And that kind of goes right here. And the reason is because I've also done research on this color, and this should be a good mixer with other colors. So again, this is an attempt at me expanding the amount of possibilities I have when I do start to mix colors. So this is also somewhat of an experiment, and I'm testing it out for the first time. I have never had this color in my palette, but I think it's a really nice addition. And the last additional color is a deep red. To be honest with you, I feel more comfortable with that crimson type of red in the palette. I feel like it's really hard to mix that for me. You can mix up a red, believe it or not, from yellow and magenta. Another reason why that traditional color wheels kind of has its own fallacies to it. But you can make a red from a yellow and a magenta, but it's not going to be, you know, crimson red. So this is a nice addition for me, a deep red that I can have in my palette. I might switch this out in the future for a different version of a deep red, but for now, this Pyro Crimson is something I already had, I had been using, and I want to keep using it simply because I don't want to waste it and buy a new tube of paint. Now this makes a 12 color palette, and I think this is a really nice full palette for me, and I could just keep it like this. But my palette has 18 spaces, and because I can add more, I decided I would. And here are the 3 colors I've added. These are what I call just extra colors because I don't think I really need them, but I think that they're nice to have. And the first one is going to be cerulean blue. This is a really popular color to have in a palette, and a lot of people use it for skies. And I'm still learning how to use it the best, to be honest with you. But I have a cerulean blue, and I also have a Sennelier's royal blue. And honestly, I only have this because I'm trying to figure out what blues I like for skies, and this is a really beautiful sky blue, but it is not transparent. It has some white in it. I don't know, it's just kind of this outlier, but I have it because I think it's a beautiful color, and I am, again, still trying to figure out if I like it, if it has a place in my palette, but for now it does. The last color I have is Indian Throne blue, and this is a color I've used before, as you can see. So it's like a dark blue. It's kind of desaturated, closer to the center of this color disc, and it just also has some good possibilities that come with it, so I've just included it as another color. So that makes 15, and then there's one last color, and that is white gouache. And I always have this around because I think it's really nice to add those little white accents back in with. And this is Holbein's Artist Gouache. This is primary white. You'll never see it in my palette because I'm not going to squeeze it out and let it dry. I use it straight from the tube, but it's always sort of on the side and I have it. So those are the colors in my current palette, and they're probably going to change again, and I'm okay with that. So I hope that you learned something from this video. I hope you got something out of it. And if you want to know how I take these colors and decide what order to put them in my palette, I'm going to share that in the next video. So I hope to see you there, and thanks again for watching.